would have been said alone.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with the regular meeting of the Littleton City Council. Roll call.
Sorry.
They coming?
Mayor Brinkman,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stahlman,
Here.
Councilmember Beckman,
Here.
Councilmember Cernanik,
Present.
Councilmember Cole,
Here.
Councilmember Taylor,
Present.
Councilmember Valdez.
Here.
Okay, will you rise for the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Any changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we move to the minutes from the 8/14 study session. Any changes, amendments? Being none, those are approved as submitted. The minutes from the 21st regular meeting. Any changes? Okay, seeing none, we'll approve those as submitted. Comments and reports, City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few. Wanted to let the council know the community survey has begun to go out. First round went out last week, and the second round will go out on Wednesday. We hope to close the response time around October 3rd, and we'll be prepared to discuss this in more detail with the council at that point. I have gone through a fairly comprehensive process and self-analysis and looking at our department heads, and I've decided to post for the deputy city manager position, so that will be out before long. So look for that position. And as you're aware, we've hired an economic development director who will start later this month, so we're very excited about that. And then wanted to let you know we are also in the process of, and I believe you're all aware of this, but we're updating our land use regulations, and a couple of the goals that we've identified, we're still working on these, but some of the goals we're working on, reorganizing Titles 10 and 11 into a more cohesive structure, distinguishing between commercial and residential projects, consolidating review procedures and submittal requirements, looking at our fee collection, the timing on that, and as you're aware, on our impact fees, placing a primary emphasis on development impact and review rather than on the type of the project. Pretty key for the council is make the code easier for the public to access, understand, and for staff to administer, and removing public works standards, taking them out of the land use code. So obviously you'll see that when we get done with it, but that's a major undertaking for us and something we're excited about. So those are it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
One question.
Yep.
On the citizen survey, if someone would like to volunteer responses.
You may not. But thank you for asking.
So with that, then, I inferred that was because sorry, I don't know how to turn that off real fast. I inferred that your answer to that, because I thought about that myself, is because this is randomized in a very careful way.
Yes,
right?
we're looking for statistical validity out of this. And
Yeah,
so
I just wanted to get that.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, council reports. Councilmember Beckman.
I have nothing this evening.
Phil?
Just two quick items. One, to mention that the Highline Canal Preservation and Enhancement Planning Study is going to be presented for the third and final time at the Cherry Hills Village Council Chambers next Wednesday. That's September 12th at 6:30 p.m. And for those also looking for calendar items that they can attend, Jim, are you going to mention the C470 Coalition?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And then the other item is with regard next week's schedule. The council will be meeting on the 10th and the 11th for the budget discussions.
Okay. Jerry?
Great, thank you. Congratulations to the many Littleton restaurants and businesses that were recognized as the best of the best by the Colorado Community Media. That's the publisher of the Littleton Independent. Also, congratulations to Arapahoe High School football team for winning over Heritage High School last Friday. With the win, Arapahoe gets to keep the coveted Brook Ridge Trophy, better known as the Brook Ridge Milk Jug Trophy. It's named after the Brook Ridge dairy farm that used to operate in that area. And last, the 41st Annual Friends of the Library and Museum Craft Fair is scheduled for the first Saturday of October, so October 6th, over at Kittering Park, just north of the library. That's it.
Thank you. Bruce?
Just I guess it was a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, attended with Jim and Peggy and Jim Thielen from the Community Development Group, the Dr. Cog Energy Efficient Building Codes.
Last week.
Was it last week? Okay, I lost track of time. Were you going to talk about it at all, or?
Yeah, but go ahead.
No, go. I'll
No.
defer to that.
No, go
because
ahead.
I never have a
Jim,
short.
are you going to talk about it? Oh, okay.
I never have a short report, so I was just going to leave it at that.
Thank you. Jim?
Do I have your time?
Yeah, please.
RTD is going to build a shelter, a bus shelter, next to the Apartments for the Blind over on Lowell Boulevard. It's a much-needed amenity. You can imagine if you are a sighted person and you are having to wait for the bus to come, you can stay inside some kind of shelter until you see it coming down the street. When you're blind and you don't know that that bus is coming, you've got to wait out in the elements until it gets there. So this would be a very great addition for RTD to put in a bus shelter over there. I'd like to ask if we could have the staff research an inclusionary zoning ordinance for the city, one that is going to help us with new multifamily buildings that would be maybe over 5 acres, pieces of property would be over 5 acres that would this inclusionary zoning would apply to. But if you can check with Lafayette or with Arvada or with Boulder, all three of those communities have great inclusionary ordinances already on the books, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Then I'd like to also ask if we would start the process tonight for the naming of a piece of property after Mary Bradford. Mary Bradford does all kinds of things for this community. She's got her fingers in so many pies around the town, it's unbelievable. And she supports lots of stuff financially. And there's a little place to the south of the melting pot. It's been commonly referred to as Bowles Plaza, but I don't think it's ever received a formal name. And I'd like to have the naming committee look at that and rename that area and also the little triangle piece to the south of that as the Mary Bradford Plaza. Kent Bagley, our RTD representative, hosted a Denver Union Station tour. Denver Union Station is about 65% complete. It's very unique. If you can take light rail and then walk up on top of the Millennium Bridge and look down on part of that, it would really give you a very good idea of what it's going to look like eventually. Also, you can go inside Union Station, and there are pictures in there of what it will look like when it's finally built. I did see today that Google Maps was out running around on the streets, so I'm assuming that we're about to get our streets Googled and you can see what's going on in the city of Littleton. At the meeting last Tuesday over in Goddard neighborhood, where we were meeting with citizens, I had a couple come up to me and were complaining about the trees in the Bowles Avenue Lake being dead and how that was such an unsightly look for the city at one of the entrances into town. So if, Mr. Manager, you could check with somebody to see what can be done about maybe removing dead trees out of the edge of that lake. And lastly, I'll report just a little bit, well, it's not last. I'll report a little bit on the C470 Coalition. We held 5 one-hour sessions over 3 days and called about 200,000 people randomly for a telephone town hall. We had over 21,000 people participate. The largest event was on Friday evening when Commissioner Beckman and I hosted the last hour of the group, and we had over 5,000 people on the line listening and talking to us. We have our meeting on Thursday morning where we'll get the final results of that. But preliminary indications are that people would like to see 470 widened, and it was slightly in favor of tolling as opposed to going to a sales tax or property tax in order to pay for that widening. And that, well, I'll get the rest of the information when I meet on Thursday morning and can report what all that is later on. Lastly is Dr. Cog, and it was an energy efficiency symposium where 80 to 90% of the state is under the current codes, and there's preparation underway for a 2012 energy efficiency code that will be coming to the cities for adoption probably in 2013. That's it.
Thank you. Peggy?
Yes, as Mr. Stallman said, 3 of us and Jim Thielen attended that session last week on building codes and energy efficiency and so forth. And I had the pleasure or ability to ride back from that meeting with Mr. Thielen, and he briefed me a little bit in terms of what we're doing. We are apparently really on top of the issues that were presented there. But Michael, when Jim is going to be making a presentation, I think to council related to the next code updates and whatever. So if he could include as part of that a briefing on how we already are pretty up to speed on what was presented at this session and what, if anything, he's recommending that we might do. But, I mean,
Certainly.
apparently some places are way behind the 8 ball, but it sounds like we're not ahead of it, but that we're on top of it. Anyway, and I see all these bright faces out there that I'm assuming are the ones we're going to be honoring, and a bunch of others that must be relatives. But they're also here, 2 students on the back row who are here fulfilling their class civics obligation. So at least call attention to them too, scare them a little bit if we can. So anyway, but it's just wonderful to have so many people here.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to agenda item 6A, our guest citizens. And this evening, the Littleton City Council is pleased to recognize the players and coaches from the Colorado United U15 girls white soccer team. Colorado United is the competitive side of the Littleton Soccer Club. This team of young ladies under the age of 15 recently took 3rd place in the 2012 National President's Cup in Sacramento, California in July. And the team also won the Denver Post Youth Excellence in Sports Award in June. And if Councilmember Sunanek will read their names, and as your name is read, if you don't mind coming down, we have something for you.
And one of the things you'll notice as these young ladies approach the mayor is that they're wearing purple shirts tonight. There are only 4 teams in the nation that get to wear those purple shirts, and those are the regional champions for each. And the young ladies that we're honoring tonight actually won the West region. So not only did they represent Colorado, but they represented the western part of the United States. Also, I just want to give a quick thank you to Linda Netherton for all of the people that are here tonight. Having been the team administrator for someone that you may know, Pete Barrett, I know how strong that role can be or not. So thank you so much, Linda, for all you've done. So, first off, Elisa Ivor, then also Jenna Bradford, Kelsey Clark, Callie Felder, Rebecca Hazley,
Stay over here.
and please stand up here, young ladies, Michaela Hicks, Danny Hummel, Katie Kellogg, Madeline McGuire, Allie McLagan, McKenna Moore, Carly Murray, Sydney Naylor, Sarah Netherton, Catherine Peterson, Julia Seifert, Allison Tuttle, Dixie Lutz, Sarah Lupking, the head coach, Sean Kelty, and his strong assistant, John Senkowski. Congratulations to these players and the parents that are certainly present for their outstanding achievement. It was won in the best sense of youth sports and a team effort by all, and possibly the coaches and the captains might share with us some of their experience and a few comments as well. But congratulations. Coach Kelty, Sankowski, step up to the mic, please.
How you doing?
So tell us about the journey from maybe league play through state cup.
Absolutely. This particular group of young women, I just met them a little over a year and a half ago, and when I first met them, they were a lively bunch for sure, and you know, it was one of those deals where we were transitioning from a coaching perspective as well as from a player perspective, and that took time. And considering where, and we just spoke briefly about this yesterday, considering where they were when we first met each other and where they are now, you know, they've grown and matured into very strong-willed and very, you know, very just unbelievable citizens. And they showed a tremendous amount of passion, heart, and courage to do what they did throughout not only the state play, but the regional play and all the way through to the National Cup. And I just want to thank the City of Littleton and its members for taking the time to recognize these women, because they've definitely earned that. So it's a group that had to fight and earn everything they achieved, and I think they've grown not only personally but athletically because of that.
I know with competitive teams that you probably all don't attend the same high school, do you? Okay. And one of the things that I enjoy about women's high school athletics here in Colorado is that you can be involved in club play and competitive play, and then at the end of the game you see your high school chums that might be playing for some of those other teams around, and so it warms my heart. And the fact that I had a son graduate from Littleton High School and the colors happen to be purple, I won't mention that this evening. So congratulations, young ladies. So.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming down.
And ladies, smile for the cameras. This has actually been recorded, and it will be on the internet and able to be accessed through the city's website. So, and enjoy school as well.
Camera's right up there.
Thank you, ladies.
Yep.
Here, you can go sit down.
Thank you.
And some of them are just thankful they don't have to do a civics report on this tomorrow. Congratulations.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. You bet.
Thank you.
Thanks, Coach.
Great job. Congratulations.
Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 8A. This is a public hearing. Oh, excuse me. Backing up. Unscheduled public appearances. This is opportunity for anybody who wants to come down and approach council regarding any issue, regarding anything within the city. We do have a couple of public hearings this evening, so if you want to speak regarding those public hearings, please wait until that time. I have two cards. Henny Lasley, do you want to come on down? Did you want to speak? Do you want Heather to go first? Okay. Okay, I got it. Heather Jordan. And please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
It's Heather Jordan, and my address is 18 Martin Lane, Cherry Hills Village, 80113. Thank you. And thank you for hearing us tonight. I'm here to talk to you about Amendment 64 that's coming up on the ballot this November. If you're not familiar with Amendment 64, this is the amendment to legalize marijuana for recreational use here in Colorado. And I'm representing an opinion of no on 64, and I would love the endorsement of the council for this as well. Amendment 64 would harm our children. Smoking marijuana permanently impairs brain development, leads to negative behavioral changes, impairs learning ability, and contributes to depression and suicidal thoughts. Teenagers are more likely to develop problems with addiction when it comes to marijuana. And this does account for 67% of adolescents in substance abuse treatment programs in the United States. This is the current statistic as opposed to once this should become legalized. If this amendment should pass, the projected age group of most impact is ages 12 to 25 during the most brain development that occurs, and that statistic is likely to double in usage. Amendment 64 promotes increased use. We know that the more available a drug is and the lower the perception of risk, the higher the usage. All experiments with legalization have led to increased use. For example, in Alaska, when personal use was legalized for adults, the rate of Alaskan teenage marijuana use doubled more than the rest of the nation. Since the change in marijuana laws here in Colorado in 2009, suspensions for drug violations in Colorado's public schools have increased by 45%. Expulsions for drug violations have increased by 35%, and referrals to police have increased by 17%. This is through a study done for the Colorado Department of Education for public schools here in Colorado. We're also concerned about the increase in impaired driving. We know that smoking pot adversely affects perception, coordination, and reaction time, which is all very important for driving a vehicle. And another concern we have is that should this amendment pass, it still would conflict with federal law. Federal law will still continue to ban the possession, cultivation, transportation, and distribution of marijuana in Colorado, regardless of the outcome in November. And I'm just a mom, a citizen, I'm a driver, I'm a business owner, and I'm concerned in all of these different areas of how Amendment 64 would affect our state. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Henny?
Good evening. My name is Henny Lastly. I live at 5110 South Logan Drive. That's in Greenwood Village, 80121. And even though I live in Greenwood Village, my car goes west. I shop in Littleton. I exercise in Littleton. I do everything here. So it's just point of reference. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of comments from Heather regarding why we are working on to defeat Amendment 64. We are a grassroots operation. We are so outfunded and outspoken, and I think over the next month or so, you'll see that the proponents of Amendment 64 will far outweigh what we're capable of doing. So that's why Heather and I, who have never been in a political environment ever, are going before every city council and school board in Arapahoe County. So we are the Arapahoe County coordinators. So bear with us if we sound rookie. That's because we are. I just want to point out just a couple of other things, that the endorsements for defeating Amendment 64 continue to roll in. Nancy Sharp just came out she joined with us, as well as Arapahoe County Sheriff. There's The Sheridan School Board voted last week to endorse defeating Amendment 64. We'll go before the Littleton School Board next week. Just a couple of other points about marijuana. It is a highly addictive drug. It's a psychologically highly addictive drug. So if someone tries to tell you that it's not, it really is. It's 10 times more potent than the drug that was available in the 1960s. So we're not talking the same. We're not talking the same thing. With heavy users, it's even associated with psychosis. And it's a big memory. It decreases your memory and your attention. We're seeing a huge increase in a chance for failure in our schools. And I don't know about you, but I think our school administrators and teachers have enough to deal with, and having to deal with an even greater use of marijuana in our community. The health problems continue with depression and anxiety. And it sends the wrong message to our kids. If it's more available and the adults pass this, we're really telling our kids that it's okay on some level. And the other thing I want to point out is that it's a constitutional amendment. It's not a statutory issue that's before our state. It's an amendment. And as you probably well know, much more than I, that's a very difficult thing to unwind when the disaster is actually upon us. So I just would like to encourage each of you to consider endorsing amendment, the vote no on 64. And I'll send you an email tonight and ask for your personal endorsement, and if you could just send one back to me saying yay or nay. And then if you have the opportunity in your next working session to collectively come together, that would be something we would be grateful for. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll entertain the questions if there are any.
Well, just to let you know that we did discuss it in a working session, one of our study sessions, probably like 3 weeks ago, and council asked for staff to bring back some information pro and con, and so I have that, and we will be re-looking at that at probably the next study session. It's not on an agenda yet, but council will make a decision as to whether or not we want to endorse as a council or not. So,
Wonderful.
thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else? Norm? Norm Brown.
Norman Brown, 6081 South Spotswood Street, Littleton, District 1. I am not sure, it's unclear to me, the second reading under the consent pertaining to structure, power, authority, and duties of the boards and commissions. I would like to make some comments about the liaison function between council and the various boards and commissions, but I couldn't tell if that was included. There wasn't a document. And so I will reserve my comments if this is not the proper time.
That's not on consent, Norm. It is going to be a public hearing,
Yeah, it's a public hearing.
not under
Oh,
consent.
I see. Okay. Yep.
So if you want to save your comments to the public hearing.
The page, I see, the page break was,
Although that
Michael.
that issue isn't
Yeah,
part of it.
okay.
but I would make those comments relative to liaisons now at public comment because that is not part of the ordinance before the council this evening.
Is that coming as a separate piece?
It is through the councils because the liaisons is identified within the council's protocols.
Okay.
So that would come as a separate piece. So it would be absolutely appropriate to make your comment at unscheduled public comment right now.
Okay, well, let me address that then. As some of you, probably most of you know, but some of the people watching may not, you spoke of Jim Thielen. I was chairman of the Building Board of Appeals when he was hired more than 20 years ago. I've been chairman of that, a quasi-judicial board, several times during my volunteering on that board. I was chairman for 1 year of the Planning Commission before, and some of you asked that I return to Planning Commission. Of course, I had the care for my father that I needed to do rather than anything regarding Planning Commission again. Those were both quasi-judicial boards. We did not have a liaison. When I was on Planning Commission, at one point I was a liaison to the Historic Preservation Board and when a council was there. In the many meetings that I've attended, I think you guys will concede that point, that I show up and listen. I've heard many references in the past from various members, previous council members, about what they heard, some program. It comes up during the budget issues as to, okay, well, this is the program when I was a liaison to, say, HP board. They have this grant program, or when the council people would say, when I was liaison to the library board, they discussed this. I think it's an important function. And I think it's also an important point of contact for you to hear from the people that take an interest, because they volunteer for that. Sometimes long-term, sometimes simply for one term of 3 years or something like that. The dynamic has been, it seems to me, that the city staff has been inclined to advise you not to attend functions such as the Littleton Inspire, to do away with the liaisons wherever that came from. But I think you need more contact rather than less with your constituents. You can't have somebody else, staff, listen for you. So a report back from the Inspire Littleton is obviously filtered through staff if that's your only point of contact. You are responsible for that comprehensive plan, similar to the function of the liaisons. I brought some items to council regarding the need to make interim appointments because we had vacancies that occurred during the year. I also brought privately attendance issues, as was part of the role of chairman. Those items are enhanced by the function of a liaison from council to one of the boards. When it's quasi-judicial, I understand, but I think there's some value there, and I would hope you realize that it's not just for this current set of council members, that if you do away with this liaison to any of the boards and commissions, that will be probably in effect for every council from here on out. And some of you, Mr. Stallman, I know, some of you have spent time on various boards and commissions. Jerry, of course, is emeritus from Planning Commission. So you understand the function and the duties and some of the decisions that come there and how they're made. That's very good. Some of you haven't spent time, and so that liaison process is a chance to see what that board does. In my experience at HP board, it's a chance for the council person to listen. They shouldn't participate. Perhaps, some people will ask for an opinion. I know Mr. Stallman has spent a lot of time with the historic preservation process, Historic Littleton Incorporated, and so on. So there's various facets and interactions, but I would suggest that liaison is important. I noted that it's been my impression that there is a suggestion from the city attorney, I believe, that less contact is better. I don't agree with that at all. And frankly, it's a problem that I don't believe has ever come up. One of the things that does seem to be recurring, and again, if I'm incorrect, please somebody rebut that at this point, but I believe, well, this current city attorney is here because the previous one, in an HR difficulty, we'll put it that way, left with a lot of taxpayer money as compensation. There's, I believe, a lawsuit now from a whistleblower, and these are things that are eating up a lot of time and money, special counsel, and things like that. A problem of too much contact with the citizens hasn't come up, and at least in all the time I've been here. But I would say in any private company, and my wife has worked for more than 20 years at the same company in HR, human resources. If this was occurring in a private company of this size, I think there would be some consequence to the repeated problems. And I don't know if it's a management problem. Obviously, the first city attorney difficulty can't be laid at the door of this city staff that's here now. But I believe you've got the same HR department in place. And for the sake of the taxpayers, at the very least, 3 strikes and you're out. So let's not have more HR difficulties that take a large check to resolve in executive sessions, please. I think that's where you need to focus, not any possible difficulty of council people attending something where the comprehensive plan is discussed, which comes to you, or the council liaisons going into the boards and commissions as appropriate. I stipulate the quasi-judicial situation, because that is a learning experience for council people. Thank you.
Paul?
Paul Bingham, 236 West Delaware Circle. Good evening, Council. I said my piece on this a week or two ago on the liaison thing. I totally agree with everything Norm has just said. Simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one, we will move to 8A. This is a public hearing and on a second reading on an ordinance. City Attorney.
This is an ordinance of the City of Littleton, Colorado, pertaining to the structure, power, authority, and duties of the City of Littleton boards and commissions.
The Boards and Commissions Task Force appointed by the City Council met and discussed with each board and commission for appropriate structure, number of members, makeup, need, and service of council goals and objectives. The task force also considered City Council goals and objectives along with the existing committee operational protocols and incorporated those into the duties and overall recommendations. This is a policy question regarding this particular agenda item is, does council want to accept those recommendations from our task force proposing the changes to the authority and makeup of certain city boards and commissions? City Attorney, did you want to give any background?
No, I think there were no comments since first reading, so we really haven't brought anything different forward than the first reading.
Okay. Council? Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Jerry. Go ahead.
Yes. This is for the clerk. This is where I was asking about under background where I was talking about the attached. I didn't get the attached.
It inadvertently, because the agenda was revised and then resent out again, when Colleen put them all together, she inadvertently left that one out.
Okay, cool.
But I just emailed it to you if you'd like to look real quick.
Thank you very much. And the other part, I know that often the staff does believe the proposal or they agree with it. But in this case where it says staff agree, who is the staff again in this case? Because it seems like I know what the city manager and the city clerk is a part of the committee.
You're saying under the staff recommendation?
Yes, staff analysis.
Yeah, so staff would be me and the city attorney in this particular case, and along with the city clerk, because we were the 3 primary folks who participated with the 3 council members assigned to the task force.
Okay. I just like to know the clarification, because when you guys are also on the board and you're also recommending, it seems like you're recommending it twice in this case.
We are the fox and the hens.
You are it. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else?
No, that is all.
Bruce?
With respect to the Fine Arts Board, one of the major issues for that particular board was the physical maintenance of some of the outdoor structures, sculpts, or whether it's brass or whatnot. We've refreshed my memory on this. We basically distilled this down to serving as stewards of the Littleton art portfolio. So stewardship in this regard means engagement of people to maintain the art in an acceptable condition?
No.
No, the city, aka the staff, will take care of the maintenance of what's acquired. So we're removing, that was part of the recommendation on reducing the staff level, or I'm sorry, the board member numbers. So the city will be responsible for the maintenance of the art and removing that entire component from them.
Okay, so that, and in consultation with the board with respect to how frequently a given piece needs to be subject to some level of restoration?
Possibly. I think there's some standards out there that the staff would work on and ensure that it's maintained. But the short answer is we're moving that entire component away from the board so that they can focus on policy, acquisition, other things, and not be out there with the
scrubbing
toothbrush.
brass.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Jim?
Along those same lines with that committee, they're responsible for putting up and taking down the artwork in art shows. And that was one of the reasons why we went from 7 to 11 in the first place.
And we're also removing that. We're removing the physical labor away from the Fine Arts Committee, and we'll take that on as staff.
And what that allows in part, too, just by implication, if someone is not able to do physical labor but is really super otherwise in terms of, you know, the acquisitions, the recommendations, the oversight, making sure that the portfolio is safe and protected, et cetera, then they can be doing that. In the past, that's been a major problem. Really good minds, really good skills in terms of knowledge, but not physically able to do things.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll open the public hearing. Is anybody, I don't have a roster, is there anyone in the audience who'd like to come down and speak on this? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. I need a motion.
I move that the ordinance on second reading pertaining to the structure, power, authority, and duties of the boards and commissions be approved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Council, any discussion? No discussion? I would just like to comment that thank you very much to Councilmember Beckman, Councilmember Cole, and Councilmember Cernanik for the time that they put in on this task force. I know, having worked on some outside task force, it does take a substantial amount of time and thought, and I felt that your process was very thorough and that you were very inclusive in your process. So I think that your recommendations were very thoughtful, and I think that they will provide a lot more efficiency, and I think we'll see some improvements. So thank you so much for all your time on that. Is council ready to vote? Okay, yes vote moves it forward. Oh, wait, let me vote. Okay.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Out of practice. Okay, moving on to 9A. This is, 9A is a general business item. It's the letter that has been written on behalf of the City Council regarding the Chatfield reallocation. And Michael, did you want to make any comments on this?
I would. Thank you, Mayor. So just between the executive session and the council direction to craft this letter, which was approved with some changes, and our water attorney made those final changes. Since that time, the city attorney and I have made contact with probably about half a dozen of the stakeholders, ranging from Denver Water to the state to Centennial Water and Sand, Central Water Conservancy District, Aurora, and the consensus has been a willingness to come to the table and meet with us and discuss how we can best manage the calls and the releases in Chatfield, out of Chatfield, to maximize the flows in the South Platte. And so we do recommend that council pass a motion this evening to file this letter as written We will file it then before September 6th, which is the deadline to file for the draft EIS comment period. And then we're actually having another meeting that's been coordinated through Arapahoe County, and the hope is that Littleton will take the lead on pulling this group together, because as we've discussed, I think our primary focus is less around the Chatfield expansion, but it's more about how do we maximize the flows in the South Platte, which we can go out there right now without the EIS and see that we ought to be having these conversations as well. So it has been very positively received, and I think that it's appropriate for Littleton to take the lead role because we are probably the most impacted in this. And we will continue. I think we've got about 3 or 4 more folks to call, but again, the support has been there from everyone, albeit some different levels of enthusiasm, but everyone's willing to come to the table. If you really think about what we're asking people to do, it's complex enough for Denver to figure out how to deal with their calls and releases within their entire system, and what we're doing now is we're asking probably about a dozen different water suppliers to all come together with all their various complexities and come up with some way that we can maximize the flows. But I think we're going to be successful at least bringing them to the table. So we are recommending approval.
Thank
I
you.
would just add to that none of the participants had any objection to the comments letter, so.
Okay.
Which was one of the other reasons we were making those calls. Thank you.
Okay. Council, any questions? Jim?
I think you gave me the answer, but your meeting with, your future meeting with water providers is not dependent upon additional storage in the reservoir.
Correct.
That's question 1. Question number 2 is, can we have somebody look at what it would cost us to put in an additional measuring gauge somewhere between Chatfield and the Denver gauge, which is way the hell downstream?
And we've, all right, hold on a sec. We've got one.
There is, yeah.
I think we've got one at the treatment plant that is that was paid for in joint with the state and us. So, and don't quote me on the, but there's one there already in place because we checked on it, and I'm pretty sure it's at the treatment plant.
That's one of the issues we probably should have had in this letter, is to start taking a look at. There's another measuring gauge besides the Denver gauge that we need to look at.
Well, and of course, we've got the one at C470.
Right.
Or,
yeah, there's one going into and out of the park.
Yeah. So I think and we've identified that our concern with it being 15 miles downstream. So I think we've identified that. But we have some other gauges that at least I wasn't aware of. Not that that would be a surprise for you.
Jerry?
At the bottom of page 6, note 3, the note ends and then continues at the bottom of page 7. Is that the proper format for that? The note just sort of gets broken up. I mean, it's a worthwhile note, of course.
Sorry to say, but it is.
Is that the proper way? I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, when you have a footnote that's too long for the bottom of one page, it's a weird kind of thing, but you'll see it in books. It might start on one, and so the line is that signal, that little partial line.
Okay.
I'm presuming that the format will change somewhat when it's put on letterhead.
Any other questions?
Madam Chairman, I move that
I have a question. Though. Sorry. On page 7, line 3, I guess, on the 2005, the Chatfield participants, were those the only participants? Or were those just called out for a certain reason?
I don't believe those were the only participants. My guess is those are just some examples of the people who were listed on that, because they may have been the only ones who, no, they didn't sign it because I don't think Denver signed that one. Aurora signed the 2005, so no, they were not the only ones, because I know Aurora signed that 2005 one.
I guess I would just say that if it misrepresents a bit then what their involvement was, and maybe, I don't know if they have to be included.
We can just remove everything within those parentheses.
I would do that.
Okay.
Is everyone okay with that? Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, just a minor punctuation. Take the comma out after Brinkman and the signature because they're on separate lines.
Got it.
Okay, Phil?
Madam Chairman, I move that we submit the letter regarding the Chatfield reallocation and the draft EIS comments from the City of Littleton, and that you have the opportunity to affix your signature there, too.
I will second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Council, any discussion?
Only
Okay.
that I think this takes a good tact. It's nice to hear that with the informal discussions that have occurred so far, there is an interest in resolving the issue, which is for the city, which is what happens with the flows within the river as it flows through the city, being our major concern. And that is comforting at this stage, but I think bringing it to the attention of the Corps, and it states in the early part of the letter that we're supportive of water concerns that folks have, that we believe the EIS in its draft stage does not consider the downstream flows adequately, and we point out some inconsistencies that are there. And thirdly, that we believe that a resolution to the issue, not necessarily related to the storage, but it can be in hand.
Any other discussion? Bruce?
I just want to point out that this is, I think, some very exceptional leadership on the part of the city and our regional partners to deal with an issue that really until 60 days ago we didn't realize was even going to happen. And there was a marshaling of folks, whether it was the South Platte Working Group with the city manager and the mayor on it, or citizens groups, various neighborhood meetings also came up with this topic. I think Littleton's absolutely on top of this issue, and it is critical. It's almost a legacy issue for us. If we didn't deal with it, future generations would have looked back and said, why didn't you? So I think we all should commend the folks that we're working with for doing this.
Bruce?
Yeah, I agree with both Phil and Bruce's comments. Wanted to ask, and I don't recall if this came up previously in conversation, the next steps after this, we submit this to the Corps, and then within some sort of time frame, we'll work with the groups that you identify, but the Corps has an obligation to respond to us within a specific time horizon, if I recall.
So there's no specific time, depending upon who you talk to. It could be 3 months to a year before they get their final out. But they are obligated under the NEPA process to respond to all the comments. How they do that is somewhat up to them in terms of if there's a lot of comments under a specific area, they can generalize their response in that. If there's not, they can choose to do individual comments. So how we receive those back is somewhat nebulous at this point. But we will certainly be following it. If you talk to the proponents, of course, they think it's going to be a quick turnaround, and the Corps is ready to respond in 3 months. But I'd be pleased if we hear from them in 6 months to a year. I think that would be. But I'm saying that somewhat naively because I don't know what to the extent of other comments that are out there.
Right.
But my guess is there's some fairly substantial comments that they'll need to respond to, and it'll take them some time.
Okay, but in theory, the result of this is if we're working collectively with the other stakeholders, I think as Councilmember Taylor suggested, part of this is we can sort of start the resolution of this for purposes of the river flows, somewhat independent of them actually expanding the capacity.
Certainly, but it's, I mean, I think our best case outcome is that the term adaptive management, which you all are aware is used in the EIS, has some better definition than just adaptive management. So if we, in theory, could get an MOU or an IGA or some type of document signed that at least says words like best of intent, will maximize opportunities for downstream flows, and signed by the current and future owners of the water, and then include that in and actually have that be part of the final and ultimately the record of decision, the ROD, I think that is really where we want to end up in here. So we'll work on them concurrently, but ultimately it would be great to be able to fold in some document into the final record of decision.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, thank you.
So that's our goal.
Okay, any other comments? I would just like to say that I think that this is a incredibly well-done letter. This is an issue, without a doubt, that has a number of different facets, and one of them is about storage, much-needed storage for much-needed water. And that, I think it's, as a city, as a municipality, we have supported this for the last, gosh, I think it's been going on for 12 years, because I think we have a responsibility to the entire region to support the, how we are able to provide resources. But the other part of this comes in that we really are stewards and caretakers of that river, and particularly the river that flows through our community, and in particular the South Platte Park area. And in doing so, I think this letter really poses a nice balance between those. In a way, depending on whatever happens with this letter, with the core, it would be kind of the cherry on top, because what the real meat and the real important aspect of what we're doing is really working on this MOU, because that's where we're going to have the most and the greatest impact. So I think this sets a very nice stage for Littleton. I think it's very well done, and I think it positions us as a partner and as a responsible party. So I will be very honored to affix my signature here too. Okay, we do have a motion and a second. I'm ready to vote.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Okay, agenda item 11A. This is an ordinance on first reading and a public hearing. City Attorney.
This is an ordinance of the City of Littleton, Colorado, amending Titles 10 and 11 of the City Code concerning the Development Review Committee.
Okay. Glenn?
Thanks, Mayor and Council. I think just to start off, I think this has been a very large effort, put a lot of hours our staff put into this, as well as the Planning Commission. But it was less about a effort to eliminate what could be a cumbersome process. Development Review Committee can be cumbersome, and the process is really outlined to give answers to simple administrative problems through a committee. So there is some inefficiencies there, but I think I'd like to go back to what the city manager said when we presented this in a study session to the council. It's really about vesting those decisions in the departments that have the expertise to give the best decision possible. So what we've done is look at when we presented it on August 14th, we went through a list of all those administrative decisions, and it wasn't just those administrative decisions. The DRC also is tasked currently with making a recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission on proposed zonings and to the City Council on issues such as final plats. So what Jan has put together in your packet is go through all those decisions that I presented to you on August 14th and actually give you references of where those amendments were made in the ordinance itself. So, but we didn't stop there. We also made a few changes that had to do with making a more efficient site development process. We created, rather than put every requirement that an applicant has to submit on any kind of case, putting that in the code, so when we change it, we have to come back before you to amend it. We created more of an operating standards that we utilize to help make that process move smoothly. We've addressed appeals, and part of that came out, I think, of the recommendations from the boards and commissions amendments. And then also time extensions, we addressed that as well. The Planning Commission spent 2 study sessions in July going through this 50-page ordinance, and then made a recommendation to approve it by a vote of 6-1 on August 13th. They did recommend a number of changes, however, and I wanted to just touch on those.
One of the things that the Planning Commission had experience with was a time extension for a conditional use permit. And presently, the code says that they, when a conditional use permit is approved, they have 1 year to establish that use or start that use. If it doesn't happen within that year, they're back before the Planning Commission asking for a maximum of a 6-month extension. Again, if that use doesn't get established within that period of time, they can come back and ask for another 6-month extension. And in the case that they heard, there were some contractor issues, some contract issues as well with establishing, I think this was a daycare. And they felt that was a bit onerous to come back before the Planning Commission. We have to post it and go through all those niceties. So they recommended that staff be given an opportunity to extend it if there's some extenuating circumstances for 1 year, and then they would come back before the planning board if they didn't establish it in that period of time. So a total of 3 years to get a conditional use permit off the ground. So we made that change, and then the other change they said is that really those same rules should apply to all the approvals that come before either the Planning and Zoning Commission or the City Council. So that would include things such as plan development overlays and plan development plans, and then the subdivision plats. And when we took a look at that after they made their recommendation, there isn't really a time limit on those approvals. What there is a time limit to actually record the official documents with the Arapahoe County Recorder. So what we're recommending is that they not come back before the Planning Commission or come back before the City Council, but what we're recommending is that staff they have a year to get their documents in order. If they haven't done that, staff has the discretion to give them another year. If they haven't recorded a plan development plan, which is just the site plan and the various architectural, within 2 years, I think something's wrong. So we would recommend at that point they start the case over, which is an additional year from what's in place now. So we vary a little bit from what the Plan and Zoning Commission is recommending with that change. The other thing that they wanted us to look at in the approval is we put in the requirement that landscape plans have to be done, created by a landscape architect registered in the state of Colorado. That's an amendment that's been made fairly recently in the state legislation. And there was concerns by some of the Planning Commission that perhaps that's a bit onerous step if it's a small remodel job and it's a small amount of landscape. Typically an architect would do those sorts of things. So we are recommending that the exception to having a landscape architect if it's a relatively small project, and we define that as generally 1,000 square feet of landscaping. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions you have, or else if we can't answer them tonight, we'll certainly bring you answers back when we have this scheduled for your second reading on September 18th. So with that, Mayor, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Phil?
Glenn, on these administrative extensions and where you do differ from where the planning board is, I guess I would have a little bit different view on that, is that it gives the staff the opportunity to have the planning board be the nasty folks and actually say no. I think that the pressure that could be brought on staff, and you may come back and tell me, Phil, here's very clearly where the staff would say no, but absent a very definitive that you'd be on the conservative side and say no, I would tend to favor the Planning Commission's approach.
Here's one of our concerns, is this isn't a, as it's written now in the code, it's not a question of whether you extend that plan development overlay. It's whether they actually have recorded their documents within that 1 year. So it's really a technical step that you're giving them additional time to do. The fear would be you come back before the Planning Commission, or the Planning Board, I'm sorry, and ask for additional time to record the documents. will it become another land use decision, and whether the whole case would be opened up again? That would be the risk.
I hear the first extension. It's the second extension that I'm more concerned about. Not the first extension, but the second one.
Okay.
Because I understood the first one as being technical in filing it. What I don't understand is now they've had 2 years, why they wouldn't have to come back before the planning board for that second extension.
I hear you. In essence, they would have to. They would have to file the case again and come back before the Planning Commission. So, in essence, the Planning Commission would have a chance to extend it.
So and maybe I've misread this. So you're saying there's not 2 extensions that's given by staff. It's one-year technical extension.
They automatically get a year. And then if they don't meet that year, staff could grant 1 year. Beyond that.
The first year, I understand that. That comes with the approval.
Right.
Then you're saying staff can grant a 1-year technical extension.
Correct.
Okay. And you said they would get a 3rd year, but what's contingent on that 3rd year?
They wouldn't get a 3rd year without them refiling the case and being back for planning
Saying
board.
that's the way it's currently written?
Currently written, it's 1 year. They have 1 year to record their documents, and that's it. There is no other appeal to staff for additional time.
But the changes are, they have the 1 year currently, but the changes are it's going to give another additional year for staff to do it. And this isn't starting the building project. This isn't starting
I understand.
pulling permits. It is just simply to file with the counties.
Did I hopelessly confuse you on that? I'm sorry.
I don't know about hopelessly, but
Other questions? Bruce? Okay.
Glenn, in the council communication, it refers that you do have operating standards established, and that operating standards issue is right at the very beginning of the new ordinance, that it's an obligation of your department to have those standards in place. I think it's important to put that on the record, that you do, and I would like to hear from you, that you do have the operating standards in place that replace much of the crossouts in this ordinance. This ordinance was rather onerous, and you've taken the specifics, the technical pieces of it, and placed them into an operating standards. Now, and then my second part of that question would be, are we just putting a different face on the same amount of bureaucratic involvement, or are we truly meeting our goal of trying to make this reasonable and timely?
Yeah, and actually we heard some concerns from the Planning Commission on that as well. And we do have a copy of the operating standards. Typically right now it's all our applications. It's kind of how we do things. And the reason we took all the requirements as far as the size of sheets, what has to be on a site plan, all those things, because that changes. We're kind of in a digital world right now, so submitting 6 copies of 24 by 36 sheets probably is not the most efficient way. So that's the reason we moved that into our operating standard. If we see an architect or an engineer would prefer to submit things electronically and that helps us do our job, we can change that and we can make that more efficient.
The second part of that is way in the back of all the documentation. It's on the piece that I have. It's page 93, but it talks about who has approval and who has referral authority, and it talks about the community development and the public works. And this is a great chart, but it does point out that we're taking a lot of authority and placing it on into 2 departments and 2 people, authority that for various reasons was spread among a DRC or back and forth as we talk about how citizen-appointed groups had some authority. I think this is more efficient, but I want to throw the caution that we have to make sure that we stay reasonable when it's one person's authority to make some of these decisions. You have to remember the intent of this was to make it reasonable for the businessman or the developer to be able to understand the rules and not feel that they are tentative and not well established.
Yeah.
I just want to make that point because that is a concern when you begin to make these changes and consolidate.
Right, yeah, I hear you. And our concern, again, is, and our mission really is to make it efficient. We haven't really taken on additional administrative responsibilities here. I think the efficiency will be, okay, we said you can't do A, and they come back and say, well, what about B? So we have to seek out 3 other people in order to get an answer on B. So I think there'll be some time savings just in that.
And I share your concern, and I think as we discussed during the study session on this format that we're proposing to you is much more the norm because it's the community development or planning departments in the municipalities across the state that hold the expertise in these conversations. It's not your economic development director. It's not necessarily your city manager. So we're putting the responsibility, I think, where it lies and the accountability that goes with that as well. And certainly the council's direction to streamline, be efficient, assist people in realizing their dreams and getting through the process has been well heard and received by both your city manager and your community development director.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Jim?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Jan for giving us a hard copy of this some time ago. It was much easier, at least for me, to work with. But if we also have copies of the operating standards, I'd like to get them sooner rather than later, so we can. I need that. I thought the operating standards left a lot of questions in my mind because I didn't know what they were, and there's a lot of references in here to where they are, and so I thought, is this wishy-washy stuff or not? And so having a copy of what they are and allowing us to look at where they fit into here would be most helpful to me. But I do like the fact that we're going to be able to shorten the timeline for getting a development out the door, because time is money to a developer. And the faster we can get it out the door, the better off we're going to be. And not having to go back and get several people together to create a decision is going to be most helpful. One of the things I was a little bit unclear on, and would this allow a developer to present ideas to the planning staff, kind of like a sketch plan, although they use that term in here, and I don't know if that's the correct term I don't want to use, but kind of like a sketch plan of what they want to develop, and then bounce the ideas off of planning staff to say whether this will work or won't work without having the developer having to spend $500,000 to come up with a plan that before it ever gets and then gets turned down. That, again, is time is money. I want to be able to see these ideas exchanged freely back and forth between the planning staff and a developer before they ever get to putting anything down critically on paper.
Yeah, that's a good point, Councilmember Taylor. And yes, we do have a pre-submittal process that, and it happens any day. I mean, a developer might come in, he's got something sketched out on a piece of paper. We don't just say, stop, go get an engineer and bring it back. We go through the various issues that we have, and we'll include Public Works on that as well, because it might include access, traffic issues, utility issues. But yes, we have those conversations informally with developers all the time. Once they submit a formal application, then the more formal process that you see outlined here occurs, where they do have to do some detailed engineering and some traffic studies, and then we put a little bit more detailed review into it. So, but the informal discussions and happen regularly.
And is that more detailed part of the operating standards?
Yes.
Good, because that would help me to have, when I was going through this, if I'd had that. And then Ms. Mayor, I have some very specific questions. I don't know if you want to get general comments first or just go into them or what?
Yeah, go ahead and ask.
I want to talk about page 6, and I couldn't tell you, your guys, what page it's on, but it's page 6 on the application. And it has to do with number 1 at the top of the page. And this is talking about the city staff review. And it's reviewing of city requirements, the comprehensive plan, neighborhood goals and policies. Is this applying to PD and PDOs as well? Does it apply to everything or just to certain plans?
I believe this applies to anything, right?
To everything?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then secondly, down on line 8, ordained criteria by which the application is to be judged. Is that judged against the operating standards?
No, it would be all those previous requirements, whether it's the comprehensive plan, our codes and ordinances, those sorts of things.
Okay.
And that's the current language that's in there today. So it'd be all those things previously mentioned, the city's comprehensive plan, neighborhood goals and policies, ordained criteria by which the application is, boy, that's
okay.
Quite a way to say that.
Makes sense now. Page 26. And this is starting with line 26, having to do with notice. It's number 3, having to do with notice. And it says in the second line on 27, shall be made by the application. Notice of the hearing shall be made by the applicant. Why isn't the city doing the notice instead of relying on the applicant to make the notice? You follow where I am,
Which,
Glenn?
no, I don't.
Okay.
Line 22.
It's line 31.
31, okay. In essence, we really make the notice. You're right. I mean, we post it in the 3 places. The one thing the applicant does is actually physically post a sign on the property if it's a rezoning. So it's a shared responsibility as far as what how the notice is done.
And so when it gets on to page 27, under section 49D, it's also the notice of the hearing being made by the applicant 10 days prior to the public hearing date.
It really is a shared responsibility. We're both doing it. They have to post their sign and sign an affidavit that it was posted 10 days prior, but we post the various locations around the city of the agenda item.
Do you think that it would be better to have a clarification in this for our next reading?
We could do that. I don't think that's an issue.
Is that spelled out in 10-1-9?
What page?
And that's in what Jim was just reading on page 27 at the bottom. It says the required notice shall be made as provided in subsections, blah, blah, blah. Is that where it's spelled out?
I don't know if it actually says the city of Littleton shall do A and the applicant is required to do B. And I think that's what Councilmember Taylor's.
Yeah, no, so I mean, I didn't go look it up. I should have. So if it's not in the other, then it should be, I think, here. I mean,
We'll clarify
the
that.
going back and forth for people is part of what makes things so difficult.
Because what we have given to us in this hard copy on 10.19 is on recording and time extensions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't know what the other stuff is without.
Okay, we'll get an answer for you.
Page 35. This is under recording. It actually starts on line 35 on the hard copy.
And my hard copy is different from yours, so I think it starts on 36 maybe, but I'm not sure.
It says even as the SDP has been recorded, the approval will become null and void after 1 year from date of approval, if, et cetera. This is your extension.
Mm-hmm.
But who notifies the county that the project is null and void? Does the city do that? And should we have it listed in there as who's making that determination that it is declared null and void?
Should we follow up with some kind of recorded document that says, or withdraw the site development plan from the recording?
Because the developer also needs notification of that as well.
Right.
So it'd be like
Point.
X and Y are notified that the approval is null and void, right? Or the city will notify X and Y, whoever the folks that need to be notified, the applicant, the developer, the county, or whoever will be notified that it's null and void, right?
Right, and certainly if it's recorded, any potential buyer would pick that up as well and assume that it's valid. That's a good concern.
Okay. Page 38, on number F, it's the time extension thing. And I think you've pretty much gone through that, but I will just make a comment that you get original 1 year, you get a 1 year extension from the staff. Seems like 2 years is plenty enough without having to have an additional extension by the Planning Commission or by City Council in certain situations. The City Council has that responsibility. So having 2 years to record that plat would seem to be enough to me, and not having to have a 3-year extension. That's my opinion. Page 40. It's also on 42. Line 27 is the appeal request being placed on the agenda of the City Council within 60 days, 60 calendar days. Why can't that be 30? Why do we have to wait 60 days to get an appeal placed before us? There again, it's time is money for the developer. The sooner we can get it before us to start making a decision, whatever that decision may be, would seem to me to be a benefit.
I thought we were going with 30 days.
Staff memo says 30 days.
But this says 60 in the ordinance, and it's also 60 on page 42 under section 69. There's also 60 days.
It was our intent to go 30 days. And with the option that the applicant, and sometimes we run into a situation where the applicant wants additional time.
And that's fine if they do, because it's their money.
Right. But then it would go no longer than 60 days at the applicant's request.
I understand
that. That was our intent. I'm sorry it didn't.
So, for procedure, will we need to amend that part, or will you?
No, well, this will come back on second reading.
We'll fix that.
This is just the first reading.
Okay.
On page 43, and this is under number B, as in boy, the notice of the public hearing, and it gets down to the very last sentence. Notice of public hearing shall be made at least 10 calendar days prior to the Board of Adjustment public hearing date. So far, it hasn't been talking. I don't have all the context for this, so Board of Adjustment, is that the proper place for this to be? Is this an appeal before the Board of Adjustment? Or is this an appeal before the Planning Commission or City Council?
I think one of the appeals was to a Board of Adjustment to the City Council.
But just take a look at that to make sure that that is the correct.
And then just one of the things we're doing when we're looking at some of the other code changes that we talked about bringing forward is consolidating all of the notice provisions in the code. So we may see more amendments, and this will be part of that as well, but that's pervasively throughout the entire zoning code. So we're going to look at that, but this will take a closer look at it, whether it applies to the Board of Adjustment.
Page 51. And you'll be glad to know this is my last one.
Yay. Good job, Jim.
This is number 2 under C2, Planning Commission, City Planning Commission action, and that should be probably Planning Board now instead of Commission, and I haven't been tracking that all the way through.
It is in ours. So you have.
They changed all the board on the electronic version.
Well, I've got the original that Jan gave me. That's what I'm operating with.
Right, I understand.
The board shall approve such said plat and approve said plat with modifications. But can the Planning Commission deny the plat? And if they deny it, then does it go to the council?
I assume they could deny a preliminary plat, and then they could appeal that to the City Council.
And do we need to clarify that?
Yeah.
We will.
And on down under section 86 there, the effective time period. Never mind. Never mind, I understand what it, I was going to ask another question, but that's all right. Got it.
Peggy?
Minor thing. With the landscape, I'm on page 23 with the line 13 with the minor, how you're defining minor. I think that 1,000 square feet could be pretty significant. And what somebody might do with 1,000 square feet, that's 100 feet by 10 or 50 by 20. You might have some beautiful fountain, and then, forgive me, turn it into a pretty risque something or other in a neighborhood that's not compatible with. So it seems to me, the issue of defining what is minor should be in more than square footage terms. And I haven't figured out in my own brain how to suggest that, but I think it has to be also in terms of the nature of the change. If maybe in terms of compatibility with what's around it, or compatibility with what's existing. I mean, I just don't know how to suggest that, but square footage does not seem to me to be by itself adequate. And maybe square footage isn't needed at all. I just don't know. So if you all could maybe meditate on that on staff and see what you might suggest, and I'll try to wrap my brain around it too. And if you come up with something you think you're going to be giving us on second reading, maybe you could email, and then at least we could be thinking about it before we actually receive it otherwise.
We'll meditate on it.
Thank you.
Bruce?
It is a tough one, and 1,000 square feet is an easy thing to measure, so that's how staff falls on those kind of things versus a bunch of language that's
But, I mean, it could be
objective.
a very significant impact on what's around it, even in that size of space.
Okay. I understand your concern. We'll think about that, yeah.
I've got a handful of questions that some of them are substantive, maybe some of them maybe more cleanup, but on page 9 of the electronic version, lines 3 and 4, you guys are talking about receiving from the applicant 2 reproducible Mylar copies. I guess that would, to me, be something where you'd probably prefer to do electronic.
In that case, because we're recording them, they were kind of bound by Arapahoe County standards.
So
they require that actual Mylar that's stamped and signed, and that's what they record. Now, that could change. They could become more.
If there's a reason for it, that's fine. The rest of them, you'd X'd out most of, or redlined out most everything else, so I just bumped into that one. A question on lines 11 and 12 there, it talks about the extension being granted, providing a written request for extension is filed by the planning division, so on and so on. So I guess the question is, what's your guys' internal standard for responding to such a request? I mean, how quickly do you turn them, or what's your expectation or target, for turning them? To Councilmember Taylor and Beckman's point, the idea being to reduce bureaucratic timeline. So if you guys sit on it for 6 weeks, not that you would, but, are they supposed to be turned within like a week?
Yeah, that's basically our operating standard is 2 weeks to address anything like this. Now, right now, we don't have that option, so we don't get requests to get additional time to record these various documents.
Okay, but maybe the upshot to that, though, is if your internal standard is, you said 2 weeks? Mm-hmm. 2 weeks, you're going to track and report on how often you met that standard?
We certainly could.
I throw that out just from the standpoint of, I think the comment Bruce made, want to absolutely streamline and want to do the right thing on this whole approach, but to the extent that we're taking a lot of information and pushing it down and saying, go for it, then I think it's incumbent upon you guys to be thinking about how you report your success in accomplishing the objectives with which you're asking, for responsibility.
Correct.
Okay.
Can I ask on that?
Please.
I think maybe working days, like 10 working days might be better than 2 weeks. There are a few times in the year when you'll hit periods that might push you outside that, and then you'd look like you were faulting when you weren't. Would that be okay?
Yeah, no, I as long as it makes, it sort of goes back to the whole issue of you measure and you track performance against a measurement based on the standard. So whatever makes sense from the standards development, I don't disagree with what you're saying. Yeah, but I think you guys need to tell us what the level of expectation is, so that we can come back and say, okay, on 99 of these you hit it, and on one you didn't, and that looks pretty good, or 80 you did and 20 you didn't. Well, what's going on?
Mm-hmm. Well, ultimately, I am accountable to the city manager, and I think the city manager would hear if we weren't doing our job efficiently.
Cool.
So, I mean, that's ultimately where the hammer would come down.
Well, it's always good to have more than one hand on the hammer.
I have no doubt in the mass number of time extensions that we'll be receiving after the year, that we'll
Yes,
be able
indeed.
to turn these around in no time flat and
Okay.
exceed expectations.
Perfect.
In this particular area.
Are you recommending we actually put a time limit in the ordinance?
No,
he's
not in the
Just
ordinance,
that
but
we have some internal control over.
well, the bigger question, which I sort of wrote further down in this thing, was how do we quality control the operating standards? I mean, if all of this stuff we would, and yeah, I get that there's not probably a huge instance of this, so I think we're fully capable of over-sciencing stuff. But to the extent...
So stop right there.
Having said that, however, how do we quality control this? We can see it in the ordinance, but once it moves off into internal operating standards, I still think, given the fact that there's, an elected representative body, we need some level of quote-unquote oversight at some level that says, yep, we agree with the performance standards, and here's your guys' measurement against that, and that's, looks good, or, time out, what's going on.
And so that actually is a manager responsibility that you just identified. I'd be happy to discuss as we work on our state of the city reports and those types of things,
Right.
of what criteria and how we present that information back. But that's ultimately what you're holding me accountable for, and the way you're going to know
Yep.
is you're not going to get phone calls and you're going to be seeing construction out on the street.
And all of those are good things.
Excellent.
But until that loop gets closed, I mean, there's
got to be a
responsibility.
level of trust, and then trust and verify.
Bingo. All right, pushing on page 16, line number 40, and maybe this talks about alternate roofing material, but you guys redlined out design of individual supporting roof structures may prohibit the use of one or more materials, so forth and so on. And there's, I think, some of the details not in this document. But I guess I wondered if this was something that also, I assume sort of what's happening here is this is supposed to be in the operating standards, but I didn't necessarily see in this section a reference to the operating standards, but maybe it's just implied.
I think a lot of this is actually stated in the building code that would ultimately dictate the
So you didn't
minimum
need it in the
slope and
ordinance
type of materials. Right. I think at one point the city was mandating cedar shake shingle roofs, and then there were fire issues perhaps, and I think that's where this whole section came from, but came right out of the building code.
Okay.
So it is covered in even a stronger code outside of this.
Okay, great. Page 19, I didn't quite understand this, which I attributed more to my lack of context than anything you guys were doing, but it says the whole mini warehousing. So you got on line 1, you talk about the mini warehousing, but then that got redlined out, and then it went from permitted to restricted uses. Can you just sort of help me understand what is going on with this?
Nothing has changed. And mini warehousing requires, right now, it requires special DRC approval, even though there are minimum standards. So it would be part of a site development plan anyhow. A mini warehouse would have to go through, and they would have to meet those standards. So I believe this ended up being a redundant section, and that's why we were striking it.
Why did it go from permitted to restricted, though? I mean, it basically says...
Because I think it actually states the uses that are not allowed.
Which is this? Which is... No other uses or activities other than rental units of space for storage shall be permitted except office space and living quarters incidental to. So that's now in the way this is written, it seems to me that it says except for office space and living quarters is now restricted, which doesn't, again, make a whole lot of sense to me. If you guys want to look at it, if you think it's doing what you intended to do, I think it's a relatively narrow application, but I'm not sure I understand why restricted was changed, permitted was changed to restricted, but no other words in that paragraph were modified.
Yeah, and I think our feeling was it's, and maybe it doesn't say it appropriately, but it can be storage of household items, can't be auto painting, can't be these various other uses. So,
okay,
but we'll look at in its full context and see if that makes sense.
Well, I read that slightly differently, Bruce, in that it was originally a permitted use, but yet the paragraph talks about all the stuff that you can't do. So why would you say it's permitted when you can't do it, and you change it to restrictive, and then you tell the 2 exceptions that are allowed to the restriction?
I think I understand.
And everything else is restricted.
The reference.
All right, so the only comment, I guess, it's hard maybe looking at this. It could just be the context. You could very well be correct. Maybe it's just the context isn't broad enough, or there's too much stuff, and you guys are pulling bits and pieces of this thing in here. But I'll defer to you to relook at it, and if you think it is doing what the intent is, I'm okay with it. I just interpreted it somewhat differently, but like I said, I'll defer to you if you think if it's
well,
correct.
That shows an issue with the code if it can be misinterpreted by 2 different people. So we will look at it.
Okay. Page 20, line 26. You guys redlined out the elements retaining to bike facilities for safety and convenience, including so forth and so on. Is that something the community development director then is intending to review as part of an operating standard?
I think it's stated in here at another location that we will, yes, community development review bicycle plans and bicycle parking, all that good stuff.
Including the safety elements that are redlined out here, I assume?
It's, yeah, typically what we'd look for.
Okay, all right. All right, I'm going to assume that's in a timely fashion. I will ignore that one. That one got handled. Oh, I think this may be the last one. 43, line 20, line 30. This may be, I guess I'm assuming this is probably defined somewhere else, but it uses the phrase zoning official, which I hadn't bumped into elsewhere in here. So whom is the zoning official? Is that you?
That's Pam Hall, actually, on our staff. She staffs the Board of Adjustment, and she's officially...
Okay, so it's specific to Board of Adjustment, which is why it's well understood what the zoning official is. And I think that's all I had, so thanks very much.
Jerry.
Thank you. Back to where we began with the one-year extension. In my 12 years or whatever it was on the Planning Commission, I never remember any builder coming back to the Planning Commission. So how often does this really happen?
For specifically a conditional use?
For an extension, because they haven't started it, they haven't submitted the plat or anything.
Right. I'm not aware. I don't know if Jan is aware of a time extension that's ended up with Planning Commission. The only case would be they would be hearing the case again, unless it's a conditional use.
But my point is the 12 years I was on there, I don't recall anyone ever coming back to us. Jan, do you recall?
Well, we didn't. Well, for one thing, the current code doesn't allow for a time extension. So when if a plat or a PD plan doesn't get recorded within the year of its approval, the approval comes null and void. There was no time.
They would come back to the Planning Commission.
No, because our current code doesn't have it go back to Planning Commission. It just doesn't. It would have to come back to, under the current code, it would have to come back to you as a new application for a PD.
And that I don't recall ever happening. Maybe once. Maybe
the
once,
only time I think it may have happened because it gotten turned down before and they came back,
because I share Mr. Beckman's concern too, that we want to make sure it's done in a fair way and timely way, of course. But I think it's just something that happens so rare. It seems to me that it happens just very rarely in the first place.
It's rare. I mean, even this conditional use time extension we had this year for this daycare center, I think that in my lifetime here, that's the first time we've had one of those. And like Glenn said, usually if it's going to take more than a year or at least more than 2 years for a plat to get recorded or a PD plan to get recorded, that project's probably not happening anyway. So it's just...
Yeah, I just hate to see our expectations of you to give us all kinds of metrics and how in measuring you and all this stuff when it happens not that often.
Again, it was a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission. It doesn't happen often, but I think they wanted to at least extend anything that came before them, extend the same kind of time extension that they were proposing for conditional use. So,
well, I'm thinking if it gets held up in your department, the city manager is going to hear about it, and certainly council members will hear about it. That'll be a good metric to measure.
Believe me, I don't like that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I want to follow up on one of the pages Bruce was talking about, page 20 again, with the bicycle parking and all. Will there be someplace requirements for what the bicycle stuff needs to include? Sorry, my
Jen, did we pick up that standard somewhere?
It's struck out on page 20, line 26 to the end of that paragraph, that the bicycle facilities have to have certain requirements.
Yeah, I think Jan has reminded me as we looked at that, it really talks about how you lock a bike in the rack, and I thought maybe perhaps that's government maybe overextending itself, and it's really not a safety issue, it's a safety of whether your bike gets stolen or not. And so, to be honest, whether we're looking at the rack to make sure both wheels can be locked with a certain kind of lock, it's not normally something we would spend a whole lot of staff time on.
No, I don't think you do that, but I think if we're wanting to attract people to shop at businesses and whatever, and somebody is taking up a parking place to put bicycle facilities, that those facilities should have some kind of probability that the whole thing isn't just going to get carried off. And, I mean, maybe this isn't the way to word it, but I'm just wondering, should there be some kind of oversight? I mean, if we're allowing, as I said, the use of of required parking spaces to accommodate that, not that it has to be here, but
I think the safety, the location and safety and convenience is probably our responsibility.
And I would say that it's approved during the parking, looking at the parking plan, and approved as that because you're doing a trade of parking spaces
okay.
for it. So it's going to be reviewed as part of the adoption and approval of the parking plan.
Well, and again, I'd say if we're investing all that we are in bike lanes and direction for bike navigation and so forth, that, I mean, if there's nothing to park, it's one thing, and if somebody just leaves it and their bike rides away, that's another issue. But I think meditate on that one too, and I'll meditate on it. See if I see something in any other city codes, or maybe you all could do a little browsing.
Anything else? Okay, this is a public hearing, so we'll open the public hearing. If there's anybody who'd like to come down and speak to this issue. Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing, and I need a motion. Scrolling.
Okay, I move to approve the ordinance on first reading amending Titles 10 and 11 of the City Code concerning the Development Review Committee be approved. I hope I read the right one.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Council, any discussion? Seeing none, you ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
And if Jan has operating standards, could we get those tonight, too? Do you have
Jan?
a hard copy? If she has those, I'd like to
Your own
have
personal
those.
copy, but we can get you hard copies.
Yeah, we'll get them to you and put them in your mailboxes. We don't,
Okay.
I think we just
All right.
have one copy this evening.
When, by what, Thursday evening, or?
Do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
As soon as possible.
Tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Or you're going to do email or hard copy?
Would you like us to do both?
Both?
No, I don't need hard copy.
No hard copies?
No,
Okay.
not for me.
It's thick. She can hold it up for you there. It's an inch plus thick of paper.
Electronic would be fine.
Email.
Email. Email it
They'll
is.
be fine.
Email?
Yeah.
Okay,
No, all the way across. Great.
thank you.
I don't need more paper.
More paper.
Need more stinking paper.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Okay, we're on to item 11B. City Attorney?
This is an ordinance of the City of Littleton, Colorado, amending Titles 3 and 4 of the City Code concerning the Development Review Committee.
Okay, this is also first reading and a public hearing. Glenn?
Mayor and Council, the reason this is a separate item is these two sections of the code are not subject to review by the Planning Board, so we don't have recommendations from the Planning Board, but they are similar amendments to sections 3 and 4. Section 3 of the code talks about business practices, and in there is a process for approval of off-track betting facilities, and the DRC making a recommendation to Council, who ultimately approves those. Simply put, the change is it'll be a recommendation from Community Development in the future. I don't know if we've ever done one of these in the past, but who knows? There could be one coming forward to you. Section 4 is our sign code, and there's a number of signs that require review by Development Review Committee, and those signs are subdivision ID signs. You go into a subdivision and it announces the name of the subdivision. Animated signs, anything that has moving type or electronic signs, that's something that's reviewed by DRC and given special approval of. Temporary development signs, these would be typically your home builder would have signs that he would put out in the community off-site saying trend homes, come to this subdivision. And then also our code does allow in pads in a shopping center small monument signs to be put on those sites. So that's something also that requires special review and approval by the Development Review Committee, and we're recommending that those become community development functions. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Bruce, and then Jerry.
It may be a little bit beyond context of what we want to talk about tonight. But since you're talking about the sign code in here, the history of enforcement of the sign code and contentious issues, there are many stories in the city of Littleton. And I think it's well within the context of our trying to be more business-friendly as well as clearer in the guidance that the sign code needs a real look. And I'll just give you one example. Is it talks about animated signs and that they're not allowed, but we have unless they're of a certain type. But yet I think we probably have some LCD type signs in the community that could be interpreted by this code as being not allowed, and yet clearly the technology is such, this is the direction that it's going. So I think we need to, as a staff, look at this and see what the appropriate standards are out there, and also get a better feeling for what the community wants, because the community may not want neon flashing signs either. So there's definitely a discussion and some consideration here.
Okay, thank you.
And I also equally contentious recently, and we had even some folks come to council here and talk about the A-frame signs on public streets. And some clarification probably needs to be made as to which public streets, which sidewalks, under what conditions, et cetera, because it clearly was an issue worthy of discussion.
Thank you.
Jerry?
It was mentioned a few weeks ago that sponsor signs aren't allowed, and I didn't see that in here anywhere. And I'm thinking
Third party?
Third party, yeah, like sponsor, like I'm thinking for, was it Taste of Littleton? I think when
Banners.
When Greg Ranke was down here, he had said something about they can't put up a sign, hey, our sponsors are, or something like that. Where is that? Because I didn't see that in here.
It is in the sign code, and the mayor's correct. We define it as a third-party sign, which is a prohibited sign. That's how it's been looked at.
And we're in the process of bringing forth an amendment, both some code changes and administrative action to allow sponsorships for city connected events, for lack of a better term right now. So you'll see that shortly.
All right, thank you.
It's right to the left of my keyboard.
I'm going to measure on this.
Anything else? Jim?
Well, I had two things. One of was third-party signs, and I was looking at it under the permitted sign types, that might be an appropriate place to take a look at this, but that was one of the issues I had. The second one was on page 1, under amendments, when it talks about off-track betting facilities. The legislature has been messing around the past couple of years with video slot machines. And do we need to address that in there about video slot machines?
No idea.
We can take a look at it before second reading. I'm not aware of any legislation right now.
Well, nothing's been passed yet. It can't get through the legislature so far, but because they can't get enough votes to move it forward. So it just gets drafted and never gets extended. And I keep hearing that it's going to happen again in the coming legislative session. So let's get ahead of the game and talk about video slot machines before it ever gets to be a problem for us in case it does pass.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, this is a public hearing. If anybody would like to come down and speak, Norm?
One question, no, Norm Brown, same address, unless my wife has taken the opportunity to put everything out on the lawn. One question about the signage. A few months or years ago, I think it was maybe last year, there was an extensive sidewalk art sign in downtown, the chalk drawings and so on for one of the businesses down there. I inquired of staff, and they said something along the line of if they had an agreement with the business or a gentleman's agreement that if someone objected, that then they would need to remove it. I am unclear as to whether that's a, it was not particularly offensive, but if every business did that, it would be a mess. And of course, a rainstorm would damage it, make a mess, and then what do? Give them, I'm wondering if it's codified, if you have some kind, if it's been addressed, signage, it was pertinent to the business, sort of artistic, but I can see where that would get out of hand. So when it comes to signs, I would hope that's somehow addressed. I don't have an objection to it at all, but it could get out of hand. Other thing, I'd spoken to some of you before about the DRC. What you've had tonight is a huge amount of work, and you guys have given it a huge amount of consideration. I thank both the staff and the council, particularly at first reading. You guys did a lot of work on this, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Norm.
I'd just like to comment about what Norm said about the chalk sidewalks, because one of the alternatives is an A-frame sign. And an A-frame sign is more sidewalk pollution as opposed to having that sidewalk art. And I know what you mean about it being a very colorful city if every business did it. But on the other hand, it sometimes may be better than having a bunch of A-frame signs trying to advertise the same thing.
Paul?
Paul Bingham, 236 West Delaware Circle. Good evening again. Councilman Beckman mentioned this a minute ago. And a couple of years ago, I fussed about animated signs in the city. I think there's 6 or 8 signs around town that don't meet the sign code at all. One of them's right here on, well, not right here, up on Littleton Boulevard on the north side. There's about 5 of them on the west side of South Broadway and about 6,000, 7,000 block. Almost all of these are liquor stores, except there's one sign down there that you folks approved about a year and a half ago on a church. These are all blinking, well, not blinking, but signs on which the contents change frequently. So it's definitely something that needs to be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, and I need a motion.
I move to approve the ordinance on first reading amending Titles 3 and 4 of the City Code concerning the Development Review Committee be approved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? Phil?
Just to say that what's before us tonight is, as I have read it, is really confined to describing an alternate to utilizing the Design Review Committee. It's not a review of sign law in itself, and I think we're going to hear that later. Is that correct? About taking a look at signage, and that all that this particular piece of code adjustment does is it changes what used to be the Design Review Committee to the Community Development Director.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion and a second. Ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Okay. There's no other business. We are adjourned.